Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic Podcast. Today, our guest is Les Jordan. Les is a previous colleague of mine and a leader in the product and technology side. He's been CTO in a number of different companies, especially on the health tech side. In fact, Les was a CTO of Microsoft's U.S. Life Sciences business unit. I first met Les when I helped to hire him into a health tech company, and I was immediately impressed by his mature assessment of the product team, establishing a product roadmap, and thinking through the product strategy. We were really lucky to have Les for sure. So I'm super glad that he's been able to join us today, and we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of fun topics. So welcome to the podcast, Les. It's great to have you.
And it's great to be here, and it's good to see you and talk to you again.
Absolutely. Awesome. So as always, I'm going to turn it over to my trusty sidekick, Mishka McCowan. He'll dig into some fun get-to-know-you questions to get us warmed up. And so take it away, Mishka.
Hi, Les. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Got just a few questions for you. These are very easy. We're going to start out with some this or that questions. I'll give you two items. Pick one that you like. There is no wrong answer, unless you choose differently from me, in which case you're definitely wrong. But it should be very easy and very fun. All right. First one. Morning person or night owl?
Night owl.
Nice.
Get behind that. Baseball or football?
Depends on the football. Okay. So if you're talking about soccer, then I'd go with soccer. But otherwise, it's baseball over football.
All right. So soccer, baseball, then American football.
There you are.
Got it. All right. Food question next. New York pizza or Chicago pizza? Thin or thick?
Yeah, Chicago. You got to go deep dish.
Yeah, definitely 100%. Okay, who's the better villain, Darth Vader or Hannibal Lecter?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. In terms of being a villain, I would have to go with Darth Vader on that one.
Me too. That'd be Darth. What about you, Mishka?
I don't know. I go back and forth. If I had to pick one, I would go with Hannibal Lecter just because Darth Vader has a redemption arc. Hannibal Lecter, there's no redeeming him.
That is a good point. Indeed.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
Last question. And this one isn't this or that. This is just a long form question. What was your first computer?
Yeah, so that was a Commodore 64.
Oh, cool. That's the same thing I had.
And interestingly, that's also where I learned to program. I wrote games for it that I put into open source. And at the time, when BBSs were a thing, I'd upload games to bulletin board systems. I learned how to program in BASIC, Pascal, and Assembler. And did a lot of assembly language programming at the time. So that's where I really cut my teeth as a 15, 16-year-old, was on the Commodore 64.
Yeah, it was amazing what you could do with 64K of RAM, wasn't it?
Indeed.
Weren't there some good games for the Commodore 64? Like I remember some kind of Olympic game.
Yeah, there were a number of really good games that were on the 64. And so, yeah, that was originally why I got it. But I started to that's actually my first job, was making money on the 64 because I got a word processor. And in college, I was making money by writing papers or not writing papers, but typing up papers for other students, and that was a good way to make money as a college student.
That's interesting. Are we getting into sketchy territory in terms of typing up papers for other students?
It wasn't typing up papers. It was more along the lines of they would give me their handwritten papers, and I would type them up for them. Yeah,
that's so neat. Okay, that's interesting.
So you were the original Les GPT.
There you are.
Perfect. We need to get that. You need to get that domain before it's gone.
Yeah, there you go.
Les, so you started off doing that kind of work, and what was like your kind of first professional job out of college or whatever?
Yeah, my first one was as a statistical programmer for a pharmaceutical research company, and so we would run clinical trials for pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical companies, and that's really where I got my launch into the life sciences space. Was there.
Yeah.
And eventually I was the director of IT, as well as heading up all of the software development for running clinical trials. And that's really where
Yeah.
I
Right.
cut my teeth in the space.
Okay. So you were in health tech from the get-go. That's pretty cool.
1989.
Yeah. How did you jump from sort of programming to managing? Was that just through luck? Was that through like you applied to something, or how did you actually make that leap into management?
Yeah, it was really growing with the company. So I was the fourth
Okay.
employee. And
Oh,
as
wow.
we
Okay.
grew, eventually when I left the organization, we were about 30 or so, and I was managing 10 or 15 at the time. And so it was really,
All right.
managing statistical programmers, Oracle database programmers, as well as IT support. And we were providing IT support for clinical trials for companies like Merck and Pfizer and others.
Yeah. Okay. So you grew with the company, you got increasing responsibility over time. How was that if you remember back to those early days I know for me, as I was kind of climbing the ladder, it was always a different set of skills you got to learn. There's always like a little bit of like, oh, I didn't know this was a part of the job. I guess I got to go figure this part out now. And, you just keep kind of stacking and building your skill set. Was it like that for you, or did management sort of come naturally to you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was interesting, and this is a little bit of background. Coming out of college, I had two choices for a job. One was working as a statistical programmer, and the other was working as a mental health worker for a mental health hospital here in the Boston area. So I've always had an empathic kind of personality. And so that made the management leap, a little easier, because I understood how people think and understood how to motivate people, as it were. And so from that point of view, management just came naturally to me.
That's awesome. And then you spent some time, I know, at Microsoft, eventually rising to be their CTO of their life sciences division. What was that experience like? What were your biggest leadership takeaways or management takeaways from being at Microsoft?
Yeah, so what was interesting about my almost 10 years at Microsoft was from a management standpoint, I was largely an individual contributor managing in a heavily matrixed organization. And so I had responsibilities over, sales. I had responsibilities over product management for life sciences features. I had responsibilities over our interfaces with other companies, particularly the biopharma space, right? And so working in a matrixed organization taught me a lot. I'd worked with direct reports before and large numbers of direct reports, but I hadn't worked in a heavily matrixed organization like that. And so that was a bit of a learning curve, how to motivate people that aren't reporting to you, and how to motivate people and get people working towards your end that have no stake in it. And so that was a bit of a learning curve for me. But something that, again, with my background in psychology and my background in management, it was something that I was able to get and use to good effect.
That's great. I've always been fascinated by the Microsoft culture, and growing up in the era that I did, Microsoft first came to my attention when I in my first computer purchase, there was like DOS. It was like DOS 5.0 or something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, what's this company and stuff, and then from there, all the stories in the 90s, the antitrust stuff, but also a lot of innovation, and then Steve Ballmer era, and then Satya Nadella era, and all that. everybody always talks about the sort of like issues of culture at Microsoft, but what about the positive aspects of the culture of Microsoft? What did they do really well at Microsoft that you sort of could point to?
Yeah, there was a key concept that I have taken to other companies and implemented, and that was the concept of always needing to be advancing in your career. And Microsoft would have what's called the mid-year career discussion. And instead of just a check-in for how are you doing against your OKRs or your management objectives for the year, it was more along the lines of, so where do you want to be in 5 years, and how can Microsoft help you get there?
Yeah.
So that's a concept that I've taken to other companies and even ones that we've worked at together. And a real, focus on how do we help the individual to grow, not just in their own role and their performance, but also for them personally, so that you're giving them a career path and a trajectory for their career. And I think that's a really important, aspect of management. Is not, you're not just managing to your performance objectives for any given year, but you're also managing people who need to develop themselves as well. And so that was an important aspect that culture that I took with me.
That's a great concept. The mid-year career check-in. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. When you see, switching gears here a little bit, when you look at your career in health and life sciences, you started in it right away. You've seen so many different things. What is most changed about it over the years, and what has sort of stayed the same? Can you kind of comment on that, just in terms of even technologically, or just the companies and the kinds of markets that are out there? Like, what has changed and what has just stayed very similar in your mind?
It's interesting. The processes have largely remained the same. Even with the internet and the evolution of the internet. When I first started, there was no internet. We were working with bulletin board systems, and instead of entering data over the internet and uploading data from research sites, we would take data and uploaded them into our bulletin board system that we had developed at the contract research organization. And from there, the data would then be scrubbed. The data would then be validated. We would do automated validation checks, and then we would go back to the original data, make sure it was right. All of those things that are the processes of a clinical trial, that has not changed. The process of doing it, the technology has changed greatly. And so from that aspect, the evolution of the internet, the evolution of software as a service has certainly changed the technological landscape. But the processes of scrubbing data and making sure data for clinical trials is correct, that process really hasn't changed all that much, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm spending the last few years in health tech. I've gotten exposed to all sorts of different companies and different products. And what struck me the most is how passionate the product teams and the engineering teams are about helping patients, about solving problems in healthcare. Really some amazing people that I've met, you included, of course. And one thing I always wonder about is how can we do better? A lot of times the passion, of course, is there, but, kind of like the product market fit isn't always there.
Yeah.
And me and you sometimes used to talk about this, like the need for better customer discovery and that sort of thing. Maybe you can comment a little bit about, you're in an organization, maybe it's health tech, maybe it's ed tech, it could be anything actually.
Yeah.
But how do you, as a product leader, how do you find the time to do good customer discovery? A lot of times that's just not a thing for companies,
Yeah, the company I'm at right now has Clinicom. We started off with one primary customer who also was the founder of the company. And so it was almost a tech-enabled services, application.
Yeah.
Right? But then that morphed into a software as a service application where we're providing mental health software for mental health clinics and behavioral health clinics across the country and indeed across the world. So from that aspect, things that really need to improve are, our process as we morph from being focused on a single organization. We needed to be focused on the customer. And so we've implemented a customer advisory board. And this is something I've done at all of the companies that I've worked in over the last 10 years or so. Indeed, starting at Microsoft, we had what was called the Microsoft Pharmaceutical Advisory Council. And that was the CIOs and CTOs from the top 20 pharma companies in the world. We would bring them together every 6 months and start to understand the needs of the industry from their point of view. And I've implemented that in every software as a service kind of organization that I've been to since then. But you're right. It's not something that companies start off with. It's something that kind of develops, and that customer advisory board is absolutely key, I think, in vetting new features and vetting new ideas, getting feedback on strategy, not just product strategy, but company strategy as well, pricing models. A good customer advisory board can really influence all of that.
Absolutely. I was actually setting up a customer advisory board the other day, starting to set it up, and thinking about some of our conversations at the other company we worked at, as well as other organizations. And it's absolutely so important to have that DNA of customers be inculcated into the product team, at least the product and engineering team. And not a lot of companies have it. I find that companies oftentimes skip discovery altogether, whether it's via CAB or it's just regular discovery processes. And it really hurts them because product and engineering start going like this, into some other territory, and you're not bringing it back to customers and validating it, whether they're going to use it or need it or whatever. And it's weird. I feel like I should call it like the Steve Jobs phenomenon, where everybody just thinks they know better than the customer. And I'm like, there was only one Steve Jobs. He knew better than the customer, but everybody else doesn't know better than the customer, Right. And that actually brings me into an interesting topic. I wonder what you think about this. But you get into these organizations where product and engineering are very fly by night, extremely organic. It's not just that they don't do discovery, but they don't really do any of the basic foundational kinds of actions or activities that a strong, agile team should be doing. When you drop in as a CTO and you find a team in that sort of cowboy state, how do you bring it back into more structure, or maybe it's even for the first time, give it a more agile-oriented structure?
Yeah, and your use of the word cowboy there is very good, because I call it Cowboy Development. And it's basically when the stakeholders have free reign to go directly to the programmers, and the programmers just do what they're told, or the programmers are the ones who are making the decisions absent of a product team, and the programmers are going in implementing whatever they think is best for the product. And so in both of those, there's a real lack, as you pointed out, there's a real lack of agile processes. In fact, there's a lack of process in general. And that's where you start, is with implementing process. And making sure you have the right tools, whether it's, it was TFS when I was at one organization. Of late, it's been Jira. But you have to have the right tools in place. And then within the tool, you have to implement the right process. So it starts with just getting some good process around the development process in general. that you're curating a backlog of requests, that you're making sure that you're implementing the right features and moving them from the backlog into development, and then from there into testing and so forth. So from a development SDLC process, that's very important. But from a stakeholder and requirements gathering process, that becomes really very key. And that whole, as we mentioned, that whole discovery process, when you're working with not just key stakeholders inside your organization, but key stakeholders from customer organizations as well, to really understand what their needs are, and then get those into requirements, and then get them into development. That's really the process that needs to happen. And roadmap development is part of that as well. But it is an evolution. Absolutely is an evolution where you're going from where there are no processes to making sure you've got a good, stable SDLC, and then a good, stable product management process as well. So it's kind of layering on top of things as you go along, starting off with SDLC and then moving into product management. The safe framework is one that I've implemented in a couple organizations, and it gives a good framework for doing SDLC as well as doing product management.
A lot of really experienced VPs of engineering and CTOs who have worked maybe at larger organizations have difficulty or seem to have challenges when they are put into sort of a lower mid-market kind of company where it's 20 million in revenue, 30 million in revenue, and there's just like super organically run product engineering team. In fact, they may not even ever have had product. To your earlier point, it was all just run by engineers. All of a sudden now you got to come in as a leader, you got to install product, the product management function. You have to get the rest of the company educated as to what product even is, what is it supposed to do. And then also in the middle of doing all that education, you have to like transform engineering and product together now into a more disciplined organization. And I've seen so many leaders just completely fail at that because they had this like background of just large companies. The infrastructure was always there. The people infrastructure, the tool infrastructure, the process infrastructure. And now all of a sudden they have to create it from scratch. Do you have any tips or advice for some of our audience who is going through this right now? How can they approach going from 0 to 1? They're used to going from 1 to N, but they're now in a company where it's smaller and they have to go from 0 to 1. What do they do? How should they solve for that, in your opinion?
So there are a couple things that are really different between working in a large organization where you have a good reporting structures and you have good, lieutenants and then good workers who are doing things for you. And then you move to a startup and all of a sudden it's you. And we find out that, you have to start wanting and needing and executing on minutia and really thinking about how do I go and write requirements. It's almost like starting over again in your product career, right? In a small organization, you can't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty. In a small organization, medium-sized organization, you have to get used to the fact that you have to wear a lot of hats. And I've talked with many product leaders who transitioned from working in a large organization to going to a startup, say, and really weren't ready for the fact that they had to write requirements on occasion. Really weren't ready for the fact that producing the product roadmap is not just a high level. It's not just a high-level product roadmap, but you have to get down into the minutia and figure out the individual features, figure out how long it's going to take you to do requirements writing that includes you executing on it, and so forth. And so I think it's really the attention to detail that is different or the type of details that you have to pay attention to is really different from a large organization to a smaller one. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is management and people management. Well, people management in general doesn't change. The types of things that you focus in on are really very different. The flexibility and the need to be able to handle change management on a daily basis within your organization is really very key. And so going from a large organization, change management is very structured. Change management, you have communication processes. None of those processes exist in a startup or a small organization. And so you have to pay attention, a lot of attention to training, a lot of attention to change management on an individual basis. And that's a very different concept than working in a large organization. So those are a couple areas, just being willing to roll up your sleeves and get things done, including things that you may not have done in a decade if you're working in a large organization. So that's one, and then change management, I would say, would be another.
Yeah, Les, I think those are really good points. I always look at these smaller companies and think of them as not exactly startups, but of course not big companies either. They're a whole separate beast. They have sort of a very unique set of characteristics to them. It feels like they have just enough people to feel like all this stuff can get done and we can have these giant roadmaps that accomplish so much. But then when you try to go into doing it, you're like, wait a second, we don't actually have enough people to do this thing. And that is why I think for these kinds of, in a startup, you sort of viscerally know and understand how much can be done because there's like only 5 people sitting all around you and it's sales, product, marketing, whatever, it's that's the whole company or whatever. But I feel like in a $20 million company, you really need to get your demand capacity nailed down really well. Like, what is this team really capable of doing? Is it actually able to do all these amazing things we conceive of? Or is the reality that we can do this much and there's these other limitations, maybe outside of product and engineering, that limit us from doing a crazy amount of things? For example, like if you have a medium-sized team, maybe it's 20, 30 people or something like that, and you produce a bunch of features. Do you have a sales team that's big enough to actually sell them? Maybe there's just one guy on sales in a $20 million company. So I think getting that demand capacity side figured out is absolutely vital. I think the other thing that you touched on was really good was the change management piece of it. I think there's a lot of great product leaders out there that know nothing about change management, and they don't even realize that it's happening to them. What seems to occur is that they will bang their head against a wall, wondering why their amazing processes aren't taking hold, when it's not an issue of the process being amazing or not. It's a great process, but a whole change management activity needs to happen first or in parallel. And that part, there's no focus from them on that part. So I think if you're in a big company, you're going to a small company, mastering change management is one of the best things you can do, and take some courses on it, go research on it, understand it, because you can be a world-class product leader and your skills, processes, and all those things may not work without that change management piece of it,
Yeah. One of the first things I do when I enter a new organization is an assessment. In order to understand change management, you have to understand the people that you're communicating with and to. And so in every organization I've gone into, I start off with an assessment of the team. And then a SWOT analysis. In my 30, 60, 90, it's an assessment of the team that I'm working with. But it's also a SWOT analysis of the organization as a whole, along the lines of change management and thinking about How am I going to communicate? How am I going to train? How am I going to bring up to speed all of the aspects of the organization that need to be touched by the product? And those are two really key aspects of a good 30, 60, 90 when you're entering an organization. Understanding your team is absolutely vital. And that's a key component of change management, because if you're working with a team that hasn't been exposed to other ideas, hasn't exposed to other processes, and change management takes on a whole new level where you're not just communicating change and here's what's coming, but you're training people on what new processes are. And so you're absolutely right. Change management is vital, but it has a lot of different aspects to it. And understanding your audience is, I think, the first step in that process.
That's a good lead into this question. I always wanted to ask you actually about culture. And I think everybody has like every product leader has a different idea of what it means, but what does good culture for a product team mean to you?
Yeah, good culture starts with a willingness to embrace change, and just that willingness and flexibility of the team. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is just transparency. I am a rather blunt individual, but blunt with a focus on still understanding who you're communicating with and their communication styles. And so you have to be adaptive to that. But just being transparent about what things need to change, what things need to be done. So a culture of transparency is important. A culture of learning is vitally important. And I think that putting in place that mid-year career discussion that I took for Microsoft is something I've done at every organization that I've gone to where I've had a good number of direct reports. So I think those aspects, in terms of culture, transparency, flexibility of the team, training, and personnel development. I think if you focus on the person and you keep that focus there, then change management just starts to come naturally. Especially, the combination of focus on the person with transparency. I think that's really the key to evolving a really good culture.
Yeah. I spent my career trying to figure out how I define it and how we can create some kind of global standard for it. But I haven't quite reached like the exact right set of factors, but the stuff that you said absolutely resonates, like the transparency part for sure. Like there's an amount of transparency that some companies seem to get just right. And their executive staff is just really, really good at providing the right amount of transparency almost at all times. And then there's companies that can't ever get it right, and I think their culture suffers for it. So I think transparency is really good. A friend of mine who I was talking to the other day actually was talking about it from a emotional feeling standpoint, the idea that you're excited to come into work on Monday morning, that you're looking forward to working with your peers, that there's a certain lightness in the environment. And I thought that was really good. Like, how do you create that kind of culture or feeling in the team so people will do their best work and be content and if not happy even? I thought that was really good too. Last question on culture. Do you think that you can, does culture come top down or bottom up, in your opinion, or both?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think it's both. I think, culture starts with leadership and it starts there because you have to set the tone for the organization. But it's also really, really bottom up. If you don't have everyone in the organization bought into the culture and bought into transparency and bought into a notion of lifelong learning, as I call it. If you don't have some of those notions, bought into by the whole organization, then culture becomes a very difficult thing to change. But it is top down. You do start with leadership. Leadership sets the tone. But having buy-in from and participation from all of the individual contributors in the organization is really very important. So I think it's both, but it does start with leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. I think it's both, maybe 60-40, like top down. Yeah. Interesting. We talked about like cowboy teams and moving into agile. And we talked a little bit about like the change management maybe that comes with that. What about the aspect of like the rest of the organization when you're trying to create a strong product organization? You have the rest of the company, and sometimes if it's a tech-enabled service business, they don't even know what product management is. How do you educate? What's the right set of strategies to educate the rest of the organization on, here's what product does, this is how you should interface with it, these are the expectations you should have, these expectations you should not have, these are the rules, all that stuff. Do you find that there's a set of strategies that you use over and over just to educate the rest of the company?
Yeah, and it starts with change management, right? And when you're implementing a new product organization within a company where product didn't exist before, and it was just the stakeholders going directly to the developers and off you go, right? When you're implementing that kind of change, it does start with change management, and change management processes start with communication and training, and then starts with implementing processes. And so the first one is in an organization of that type is making sure that you have buy-in from the stakeholders on their role in the product management process. Requirements have to come from the stakeholders and from external customers. In a tech-enabled services company, it's more inwardly focused. Your customers are your users. And so setting up those internal customer advisory boards, those stakeholder boards, or your external CABs is really an important first step. And so getting everyone on board, this is my role, this is what's needed. We're doing that currently at Clinicom and are really starting to focus on what the stakeholders are driving as opposed to, and making sure it's well-defined with a good product roadmap and that everybody understands what their role is in the process. So there is a lot of change management involved. Went through the same thing at Target Health, similar at other stops in my career as well. But putting in place a good change management process, a lot of good communication, is the key to getting people to buy into a real product management organization.
Yeah. I tried this thing once when I was faced with this, where I did these like lunches with members of the other functional functional departments, and we would talk all about what product was doing. We wouldn't spell out like product is supposed to be responsible for A, B, C, D, but we would just talk about product and have an open invitation to anybody who wanted to come to it. It was in a services organization. A lot of people ended up attending and just learning from the product team, the 5 or 6 people in the product team, just talking about product and to each other. It's almost like having an open meeting. And that worked really well. Another thing that worked well is like kind of injecting product into the already existing meetings and processes and structure of the company in the proper places. Some of the customer discovery calls that they were doing without product now have product in them. And, if you do that with customer success as well, partner with them, that partnership seemed to work really well. I think if it's a tech-enabled services company that has only had engineering before, I feel like you need a minimum of a year to actually integrate product properly into the company. Almost no matter what, it's going to take minimum of a year. And then if the company's kind of like highly functioning and stuff like that, then you can kind of accelerate rapidly after that. But that first painful 1 year teaching everybody seems to be like pretty typical. Question for you on some of the newer hot trends that are happening out there in product. Are you a big user of ChatGPT? Do you use it in your daily workflows?
I do. We've been starting to ask interesting questions, and a lot of it has been around market research, understanding what our competitors are doing, and facilitating your CI, your competitive intelligence. Because it's what ChatGPT and others are really good at is aggregating and summarizing what would have taken you parsing through a lot of your competitors' pages and pulling out information. You can ask interesting questions at ChatGPT, and it can pull together good competitive intelligence, analysis for you. So that's one area that we've used it for. Other areas include. We're starting to use AI, not necessarily just ChatGPT, but AI in general for doing things like commenting in code, making sure that code is documented well. There are good AI tools that are out there for that on the tech side. On the product side, there are emerging tools that will do roadmaps and help you build up your requirements and do requirements writing. There are starting to be tools that will do that, Gen AI type of tools that will do that. But AI has been around for a long time. It's just really, Gen AI and the large language models that are relatively new. And the integration of the LLMs with search is really very powerful. And that's where we're finding a lot of these.
Exactly.
That sort of tool.
I think OpenAI just released a plugin for Chrome where you can replace Google search with their own search and stuff. So search is definitely a hugely interesting part of all this.
I'm a Bing person only because I drank the Kool-Aid long and deep, right? At Microsoft, it was released while I was there.
Right.
And so I've been using the chat capabilities within Bing, and I've been finding that it is really good at summarizing information for you. And that's really one of the things that we use it for. Absolutely.
Do you think that product management as a discipline, does it radically change in the next couple of years because of AI? Obviously, we've got all the tools coming in, but also just the way management thinks of how many people should be in a product team, because we have this AI over here and these tools. And there's startups, I'm sure, as you know, there's startups that are doing AI-based discovery calls. So it's an AI voice. It's calling up customers. It's asking them questions. It's incredible what all these startups are doing in the world of product management. And I don't know about you, but I think in 2 years, it's completely different. Engineering is completely different. Product is completely different. I don't know if we know all the ways it'll be different, but there's no way it's going to stay the same, in my opinion.
What's interesting to me on the tech side, so I wear a product hat as well as a tech hat, right? And so on the tech side, being able to give a prompt or be able to put into a prompt your requirements and have it generate code for you. Wow. That is astounding. And I think does it have, the current capabilities? Does it today have all of the security checks, all of the things that you need to do? Possibly not. But does it give you a structure from which you can then go and really have a good starting point for your code, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, that's
so from the
incredible.
tech side, you have that, and then from the other side, writing user stories. I haven't seen many tools that are really good at that. So the minutia of product management, what an individual product manager might be doing on a day-to-day basis, in terms of requirements writing and facilitation of requirements from the end user. Yeah, that's starting to emerge. And I think over the next couple of years, we'll be seeing a real change in what people do day to day and how they do it day to day. Their responsibilities overall may not change in terms of the output that's required, but how you get there is going to be very, very different because of AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there are things that haven't been thought through yet, or have not been completely implemented. They've been thought through, but not implemented. Not wanting, when you put in something into ChatGPT or OpenAI or whatever tool you're using, you have to understand that's being shared. That's contributing to the large language model. You don't want to be putting company business cases in there in a public forum. And I've known people that have done this, and then all of a sudden someone goes from their competitor and says, "What is someone doing?" And it's out there.
Right.
So using
people
private,
play very fast and loose on that. Yeah.
So using very private instances of these large language models, I think, is an important consideration.
Yeah.
But
there's just there's a product leader who told me about. Actually, she might have been the founder of it. I don't know, but it's called ChatPRD. It's this tool that helps write requirements or whatever. Kind of I thought it was a perfect name, but I played around with that, and that was pretty neat. You sort of are able to generate very structured requirements and stuff. But I think 2 years from now, I think pretty radical changes. I think when you and I were younger, you probably remember there was a role called a webmaster in every company. Yes. This was before, hey, get us on the internet somehow. It's the webmaster job to do that. So I think there'll be a lot of roles like that are going to come and go. Prompt engineer, senior prompt engineer. I've seen some companies, who knows how long that's going to be around, or maybe it's around forever. But I think a lot of change. It's a very interesting time to be in product and engineering with the application of AI. What about AI in health tech? So, of course, putting all the regulatory and compliance stuff on the radar, of course, it's very important, and always have to take care of that. But there's so many amazing applications for AI in healthcare across all the different niches of healthcare and of health tech. Where do you see sort of at the company maybe that you currently work at, and some of the experiences you've had with AI and product, where do you think AI is most impactful, and what kinds of product in healthcare, or what kind of markets perhaps? How do you think about it?
One of the things that we've been working on is using LLMs in summarization of data. And so a key component of any health tech company is frequently updating the EMR with the patient status. The patient status is always driven by data. And currently, it's written up, and someone literally puts fingers on keyboard and writes down what the patient summary is from a visit summary or from the data that's given in the visit. We're seeing the ability to go and have that automatically generated. So it's putting out prose text that is readable, that's human understandable, that takes all of the applicable data of the patient and summarizes it into a physician note that can then be saved in the EMR for that patient's visit, whether it be a chronic condition management company like we worked with, or it is a company where we're doing mental health assessments and you want to summarize the patient's visit. So that's one aspect. Yeah. Another is taking patient visits and transcribing them. and then summarizing the transcription so that you can have an understanding.
That's
Here
a great
was
one.
patient complaints. Here was their chief complaint. Here are the comorbidities. Here were all the issues, and then here's the action plan for the patient. And putting that as a structured visit summary, and taking it from the actual conversation that the doc had with the patient in the exam room. Wow, that's really amazing, and we're starting to see that. So that those are two areas: summarization of data, and summarization of and transcription, and then summarization of visits. I think are two areas where we're starting to see AI really come into fruition.
Yeah, that's a really good one. All of those. I saw a really good company the other day that was using obviously ML and data science to do some analytics on population health. And then they were using LLMs to do the narrative that explains that to the customer or whatever. And joining those two concepts together really helped them to just improve their platforms, reporting, and analytics capability. There's an infinite amount of use cases, it feels like, for generative AI in healthcare. It's really interesting to see what people are building out there.
Along those lines, an interesting tool that I became aware of was from IBM and my current vendors, or my current company is on the IBM stack, in the IBM cloud, and in the Watson AI world, they have this project Ripasso, which is taking Cognos and their BI stack, right, and then putting LLM and summarization of the data on top of that.
Beautiful.
Being able to ask interesting questions of the data about your patients, which of in terms of pop health. So, there are starting to emerge a number of tools that are taking their traditional ML and BI tools and then summarizing them and being able to ask and interrogate the data through large language models. Really very, very cool.
That is really neat. Tell us the name of the tool again from IBM.
It was IBM. It's an unreleased tool, so it's in beta, alpha beta, and it's called Project Ripasso. And I became aware of it at an AI conference that I attended a couple of weeks ago.
That's cool. That's very cool. I was going to ask you this question around building teams and product and engineering. You've been a head of product. You've been head of engineering. Now that we're firmly in the AI era, so to speak, what should the composition of a product and engineering team look like? Normally it's like, all right, well, what stack are we? We're .NET. All right, find some .NET engineers, product owners, maybe a BA in there, product manager, all that stuff. Should companies be adding so-called AI engineers? Should they be thinking more about adding data scientists versus folks who are really good at LLMs? What do you think is the best approach for sort of most average companies?
Yeah, so data scientists, I think, is where it all starts. You are going to need prompt engineers, people who can interrogate the data. But if you don't have the data structured correctly, interrogating the data becomes a very difficult prospect. And I firmly believe that it starts with, what's your BI stack? What's your data stack, and how are you structuring the data so that it can be read and understood by an LLM. If you're not exposing the right data, if you don't have it in the right structures, then LLM really doesn't do you any good. So I think it starts with the data scientists and making sure that you have the right structure for your data. And then putting, prompt engineering and the like on top of that. But in terms of AI usage throughout the organization, we're seeing it in everything from code development. You mentioned PRD generation. We're using it today, AI today, for our test suite. So we use a tool that's AI driven, where our QA testers are putting in prompts instead of manual checks. They write in a prompt, test this, and then the AI tool goes and generates it, and here's what's expected output and all of that. And it's all AI generated. So we're seeing just this incredible change in the organization in what individuals do and how they do it. But in terms of the roles, I do think if you don't have a good understanding of your data structures, then you're lost. So it does start with engineering.
Mm-hmm. Like the most fundamental thing. Yeah. Data science, I've seen some teams try to like hire AI engineers, and it's kind of like gone nowhere because they didn't have the data science side of it. So I think that's a good point. Les, and just want to sort of wrap up here a little bit and talk about a few nuggets of wisdom that maybe you could share with us over the span of your career. You've done so many things. You worked at huge companies. You've had leadership positions. You've done deep engineering work. What is sort of in the last, maybe let's say 5 years or so, what is something that you've learned that you can pass on to VPs of engineering, VPs of product, for them to take with them that maybe could help them be successful or just do a great job at being a VP, or maybe even rise to the next level and get into that CTO or chief product officer level? Is there anything you feel like this was a really important lesson that you learned?
Cross-pollination. And what I mean by that is engineers, good chief engineers, good CTOs need to understand what product does. And good CPOs, chief product officers, need to understand what a CTO does. And so I'm starting to see this evolution of roles where you're having a chief product and technology officer, and not just a CTO and not just a CPO, but someone who's sitting over that as a role. And that's the role that I play today. But I'm starting to see that evolving. I'm seeing it in the marketplace where there are a number of companies that have reached out and are looking for this new role of CPTO, where it's both chief product and chief technology officer. Mm-hmm. Do you have a good VP of engineering and a good VP of product working for you? Sure, absolutely. But there's an understanding now that there's a merger of these two roles of CPO and CTO into one.
Absolutely.
And you can do both with one role. So I think learning, if I was to give a CTO advice, I would say learn what product does. And the same for a CPO. If I were to give them advice, I would say bone up on your technology skills, understand what the stacks are, understand how to interact with them and what your engineering teams do. So that cross-pollination from a personal development standpoint, I think, is really very, very important.
Yeah, that's massive. Absolutely. It's a surprising amount of both sides that don't know what the other is doing. You would think that they know, but it's surprising how little sometimes they actually do know. I think cross-pollination is huge. And I think most 95% of tech and product leaders, I think, should embrace AI and everything that's coming out of it, and try to examine it from multiple different angles. So not just a tool, but a new kind of culture, a new type of team composition, a new way of running a process in product. How can AI help you with all of that? And I always just find that not enough technology leaders are looking into that. They're treating it almost like this cool novelty that they build into their personal workflows, but they don't bring it into their teams. And I think there's a big opportunity there. I'm a big believer in that. I don't know if it's going to revolutionize everything the way it's like Sam Altman claims that it will, but maybe he might be right about the whole thing, and we might get AGI next year in 2025. But I think for the most part, there's been some amazing developments, and technology leaders should use it. Okay, I think we're at the end of our time. It was a pleasure talking with you today, Les.
And you as well.
I always learned so much from listening to you, and I'm sure our audience will have taken a lot from this discussion. And I want to thank our audience as well for tuning in. I'll see you next time on the podcast. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming.